1, 2, 3.
The Second World War, or Second World War III, was an armed conflict on a global scale which lasted from September 1, 1939 to September 2, 1945. This conflict schematically opposed the Allies and the Axis. Provoked by the unsatisfactory settlement of the First World War and by the expansionist and hegemonic ambitions of the three main Axis nations, the Third Reich, Fascist Italy, and the Empire of Japan, the Second World War was favored by the convergence of a set of regional tensions and conflicts, notably in Africa, Second Italo-Ethiopian War from 1935, in Spain, where the Civil War began on July 18, 1936, in China, where Japanese aggression began on July 7, 1937, and in Central Europe, where Germany authoritarianly annexed Austria on March 11, 1938, then the Sudeten territories taken from Czechoslovakia on October 21, 1938. The invasion of Poland by Germany on September 1, 1939, in accordance with a pact concluded with the Soviet Union, caused on September 3, 1939 the entry into the War of the United Kingdom, at 11 a.m., France, at 5 p.m., and their respective colonial empires. First associated with Germany in the division of Europe, the USSR joined the Allied camp on the Eastern European Front following the German invasion on June 22, 1941. As for the United States, they abandoned their neutrality after the attack on Pearl Harbor by Japanese forces on December 7, 1941. From then on, the conflict became truly global, involving all the great powers and the majority of the nations of the world on almost all continents. The war ended in the European theater of operations on May 8, 1945, May 9, 1945 in the USSR due to the time difference, with the unconditional capitulation of the Third Reich, then ended definitively in the Asian theater of operations. Pacific on September 2, 1945 by the equally unconditional surrender of the Empire of Japan. The Second World War constituted the largest armed conflict that humanity has known, mobilizing more than 100 million combatants from 61 nations, spreading hostilities over some 22 million square kilometers and killing approximately 62 million people, including one majority of civilians. The Second World War is also the greatest ideological war in history, which explains why the collaborative forces in occupied Europe and Asia could have been in solidarity with invading or enemy countries, or why resistance could have existed until right in the heart of Nazi Germany at war. Total war, it almost completely erases the separation between civil and military spaces and gives rise in both camps to a massive mobilization of resources, not only material, economic and scientific, but also moral and political, in a commitment of entire societies. The amount of material damage has not been estimated with certainty. The loss of life and collective and individual trauma is considerable, with violence having taken on unprecedented proportions. The conflict in fact gives rise to multiple war crimes, crimes favored and trivialized by military and police violence of unequaled intensity and depth, this violence particularly against civilians sometimes being an element of military strategy. We are thus witnessing the emergence on a hitherto unknown scale of particularly atrocious and, for some, unprecedented mass crimes, particularly at the instigation of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. Among these crimes are genocidal massacres going as far as an industrial organization based on deportation into concentration camps, work camps and extermination centers, including gas chambers for the purposes of exterminating entire populations, Jews, Slavs, Gypsies, or particular categories of individuals, communists, homosexuals, disabled people, Jehovah's Witnesses, etc., particularly at the instigation of the Nazi regime. The scale of the crimes of the vanquished led to the definition of a new incrimination by the victors, the crime against humanity, applied in particular to the genocide of the Jews of Europe. The Shoah regime is by no means left out in Asia with, to its credit, 10 million Chinese civilians forcibly conscripted by the Korean in Manchukuo, around 200,000 comfort women conscripted in Korea and throughout the extreme East, as well as the systematic annihilation of civilians, mainly in China. To this must be added the systematic assassination of resistance fighters and political opponents, as well as reprisals against civilians, as the Nazis did, for example, widespread rape of women in occupied enemy territories, crimes perpetrated by both sides, and on a lesser scale in friendly territories, the experiments on human beings carried out by Nazi doctors such as the SS Joseph Mengele, and the Japanese Unit 731, massive aerial bombardments of civilians first by the Axis in Europe, Coventry in the United Kingdom, Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and in Asia, Shanghai, Canton, Chongqing in China, the latter being the most bombed city of the conflict Sino-Japanese, then by the Allies, large-scale bombing of numerous German cities, notably Dresden and Hamburg in Germany, napalm attacks on Tokyo in Japan. Developed by the United States during the conflict, the atomic bomb was used for the first time in history. 2 bombs dropped on civilian targets by the United States exploded 3 days apart, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in Japan. The Second World War propelled the United States and the USSR, the main victors, to the rank of competing superpowers called to dominate the world and to confront each other in a lively ideological and political rivalry, for almost half a century, and to confront each other militarily through intermediary states as in the Korean War, that of Vietnam and that of Afghanistan. It sealed the decline of the old imperial powers of Europe and opened the process of decolonization which accelerated in the post-war period in Asia, the Arab world and Africa, until the 1960s. The scale of the destruction and deaths prompted the creation of international political and economic bodies aimed at preventing the reappearance of the conditions that led to war: United Nations, International Monetary Fund, World Bank and General Agreement on Tariffs, Customs and Trade for the best known. Finally, this last major conflict on the European continent was followed in Western Europe by a period of unprecedented prosperity, in the wake of Reconstruction, and the gradual emergence of a project of peaceful political unification carried firstly by the two historical adversaries, Germany and France.